The Harmonic Convergence, The Untold Story. Chapter 5, The Destruction of Tiamet. Maxim closed his eyes and went into a trance. We all waited. Eventually, he opened his eyes and addressed us. "We need to go back to our home in Lemuria," he said. "It is too dangerous to stay in Atlantis." "Well, what did you see?" asked Cinderella. "I can see a massive, destructive force that is soon to occur," replied Maxim, "and it cannot be stopped. In Lemuria, we can access our resources and find our way to safety." "Is Lemuria safe from the Dark Ones?" asked Cinderella. "Yes," acknowledged Maxim. "Even although Atlantis is experiencing harsh times, Lemuria is experiencing harmony. The Dark Ones cannot penetrate the Lemurians' high-frequency minds and energy of love." "There is a spaceport in Babylon, the capital of Atlantis," said Shama-Ra. "Perhaps we could travel to Lemuria on a freighter." "The capital is where the higher echelon of Atlantis live," said Dhow. "It isn't safe. The Dark Ones have control of the spaceports and the jump rooms and are aware of everyone's comings and goings." "Yes, in essence, they are now in control of Gaia," interjected Orca, "and are battling to be in control of the other planets and moons in our solar system. The solar system is a nursery for many different frequencies, and they want control of it all." "Absolutely," said Maxim. "I suggest that we travel to the Hanging Gardens in Babylon, located at the Fertile Crescent. There is a crystal temple there that has a jump room, and I heard that the High Priestess knows how to conceal the jump." "Ah, yes," I said. "I know the temple and the High Priestess. She is from Lemuria, and her name is Ariana. She is very discreet. We can trust her." "Well, we need to travel to Babylon undercover," said Orca. "Yes," agreed Maxim. "If we sail down the Tigris River, we will have to sail almost to the Persian Gulf and then come up the Euphrates River against the tide. This would take us too long. It would be much quicker to sail a part-way down the Tigris to the merchants and join their caravan. We can travel over the desert and through the mountain ranges into Babylon." "That is wise," said Dhow. "The Dark Ones are also living underground, and they are aware of what is occurring on the surface. They know who we are and are keeping an eye on us." The following morning, after gathering supplies, we boarded our small dhow boat on the Tigris River, and after a short trip, arrived at a settlement where the merchants lived. Maxim knew the merchants, and they were more than happy for us to join their caravan. We gathered supplies and purchased appropriate clothing for the caravan. Our attire consisted of full trousers that were worn by both men and women, and a long collarless shirt that was worn outside of the trousers. Maxim, Dulkar, and Altar each wore a man's short coat of rough woolen cloth that had coloured trim on the hems and cuffs. I wore a loose, long-sleeved cloak made from an animal skin. We all wore high leather boots and a sarband, or a cloth that was wound around the head. Naishara, Sarah, Cinderella, Shamara, and I also wore a cloth around our face so that only our eyes were visible. I remembered that I had ridden camels on other timelines, and certainly it was effortless to connect with the magnificent animal that I would be riding. She lowered her body to the ground, and her legs tucked beneath her. I climbed onto her back and made myself comfortable in between her two humps. There were water containers and delectable food stored inside the camel bags. The water containers were made of camel stomachs so that the water could seep through the skin. This kept the outside of the vessel damp, and as the heat evaporated the water, it kept the water inside of the vessel cool. The Kilim camel bag was constructed from plant-dyed wool, and the pigments were ochre, deep blue, and cream. The camel bag had tassels made of horsehair, or perhaps hair from the camel's tail, and everything smelled rich and earthy. I stroked the camel's neck, and leaning forward, I whispered the sign for her to begin walking. She slowly raised herself onto her toes, and as she began walking, I was jostled around on her back. I could hear the camel bells ringing. I could feel the humidity pressing against my skin, and I felt exuberant to be on this wonderful adventure. After several days and nights, we arrived in Babylon. Babylon is a huge fifth-density city and the headquarters or capital of Atlantis. It was also the wealthiest merchant city in the world. It was positioned a good distance from the intergalactic spaceport, and there was another spaceport in the upper stratosphere to accommodate larger craft. The majority of Atlanteans were living in Appalachia, whereas the privileged resided in the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent had a population from many different nationalities around the world. The Fertile Crescent is irrigated from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and being a food source all year round, it was the food basket of Asia Minor. In the dry periods, if the water from the mountains was heavily reduced, there were still 2 rivers to irrigate the land. Atlantis occupied 70% of the land that covered Gaia and comprised 5 continents. Gaia was mainly forested, and the climate was wet, green, and fertile. While there were still many oceans and seas, they were a much lower level than in 21st century Earth. Babylon was the home of the fabled Hanging Gardens of Babylon and one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. We ventured down one of the walkways with imposing city walls, but had to stand aside as two chariots came hurtling down the road. "Whoa," I said. "They were going fast." We exited the walkway, and the sight before us was a feast for the eyes. Even although we had visited Babylon many times before, this city never ceased to amaze us. "Look at these beautiful balustrade walkways," exclaimed Shamara, her eyes wide with delight. "And those exotic creepers and plants that are hanging down from the planter boxes. And how the plants curl up around those columns," I said. "My goodness, those columns are simply massive." "The gardens look as though they are hanging from the sky," said Dulkar, as he gazed up at the plants that were growing over the balustrades and columns. "They seem to defy gravity." "Magnificent," said Naishara. "These lush gardens of exotic trees and plants are divine. And the statues, the water fountains, and the elegant arched stone bridges are simply exquisite. I love these huge stone steps that lead up to the temples," said Shamara excitedly. "The temples are so tall, they almost disappear into the clouds. And, those palaces, they are decorated with the most stunning ornate tiles. The fragrance from the flowers is intoxicating," said Cinderella. "And the colours, they are so striking." Maxim pivoted around on his feet, his arms held out in appreciation, and a huge smile across his face. "And all of these beautiful gardens," he said, "perhaps thousands of gardens, even displayed on the roofs of the buildings, are fed with fresh, clean water from the mountains." "Yes, the sound of water can be heard no matter where we are walking," exclaimed Sarah. "You can now see, Cinderella," said Maxim, "why Atlantis is regarded to be an island. It is surrounded by rivers, waterways and boats, but it is actually comprised of 5 continents." I closed my eyes, and journeying once again into Earth's future, I could see that the city of Babylon was far less beautiful than its former magnificence. Nebuchadnezzar, the most famous of Babylon's rulers, oversaw the construction of the Temple of Marduk. This temple sat atop a 91-meter ziggurat, accessible by a ramp that curved around its exterior. It is not hard to believe that Old Testament authors may have modelled their Tower of Babel after the Temple of Marduk, known as the House of the Frontier between heaven and earth. A few short decades after Nebuchadnezzar's death, Babylon was taken by the Persian conqueror Cyrus II, who reduced the city to just another outpost in his vast Iran-based empire. After being sacked by the Parthians in the 2nd century CE, Babylon never made a comeback. Many thousands of years later, looting and warfare reduced Babylon to the barest of ruins. The ancient city of Babylon in 21st century Earth is located approximately 85 kilometers south of Baghdad. As a result of the seedy theme park reconstruction by Saddam Hussein, Babylon has now been lost in time. Military tanks can be heard rolling over this once magnificent site, and companies pump oil from beneath the ancient soil. Much of this area now lies beneath what is known in Earth's future as Iraq. The wars in Iraq were designed to access the underground caverns below the city of Atlantis. On top of these caverns were all of the foundations of this ancient city that the Dark Ones did not want to be discovered. If Babylon and Atlantis was discovered, it would change the course of their fabricated, recorded history. "All right," said Maxim, breaking my reverie. "We urgently need to find Ariana and the temple in Babylon." We walked through the streets, passing the bazaars and the many merchants who were selling their wares. There were screeching monkeys stealing fruit from baskets, children ducking around people and tables, and all of the women wore exquisite silk and embroidered robes. Eventually, as we turned down one of the streets, there was the temple, rising up in front of us. We all stood in awe of this magnificent temple positioned in the city of Babylon. The temple was constructed from crystals that splayed out shards of light and glistened in the ether in every direction. The interior was open because the climate was humid. However, the construction boasted magnificent cathedral-shaped apertures. The choristers from Jupiter were frequent visitors to Gaia. Therefore, many of the crystalline buildings were duplicated from their cities of light. The temple, which was built on a node, being an intersection of ley lines, was designed to harness the crystalline energetic structure that naturally exists on Gaia and transform it into zero-point energy. This was the same crystalline structure that held the firmament in place, and the same technology that enabled us to timeline jump anywhere around Gaia. We entered the temple and easily found Ariana. Ariana was dressed in an emerald robe in the typical Atlantean style, a sleeveless full-length gown with a deep V neckline. She had blonde hair, large blue eyes, and a rosebud mouth. After greeting each other warmly, Ariana ushered us through to the jump room. "If you would like to stand together here in the chamber," she said, "I will activate the crystals so that you can make the jump." "I have never made a jump from a room like this before," said Shamara. It is like a timeline jump," said Altar. "However, we are staying in the same period and in the same frequency of time. We are just relocating from one place to the other." The jump room appeared to be a crystal cave with a row of crystals that acted as a control panel. We all stood together, and Ariana pushed the crystals to create the frequency of our home in Lemuria. The air is ultra-fresh and clean in Lemuria as it is closer to Antarctica. Although Antarctica is forested, the air comes over thousands of miles of ocean, and so we were all struck by this fresh, clean smell. We sensed the fragrance of Lemuria's plants, pollen, and animals, and slowly this fragrance filled the room. The room was actually recreating the frequency of our destination. An intense light show of colour danced all around us that was absolutely stunning to behold. We all felt an extreme electromagnetic discharge, as though our hair was standing on end, and in an instant we were gathered in our home in Lemuria. "Wow," said Shamara, "what an experience!" Our home in Lemuria was a temple constructed from stone, and it also had enormous arched cathedral windows. It was slightly elevated above a glorious river that wended its way around the circumference of the temple, and its magnificent golden domed roof was shining in the light of the sun. In Lemuria at this time, the climate was subtropical, and the vegetation and wildlife was abundant and colourful. I looked out of the window and felt excited to see our flat-bottom boat tied up to the pier. "Oh, Maxim," I cried with joy, "I can see our boat, Orca." Maxim joined me at the window, and a huge smile across his face, he placed his arm around my shoulders. "Ah, yes. Isn't she extraordinary? I remember our many wonderful adventures sailing around these rivers." Dulkara and Sarah stepped over to join us at the window. "Did you build her, Maxim?" inquired Dulkara. "Of course," said Maxim, and gave Dulkara a slap on the back. "Who else would have built her?" We all laughed. Cinderella approached us, a concerned frown across her face. "Maxim," she inquired, "I can't wait any longer. Can you tell us what you saw in your vision?" Maxim turned to face everyone in the room, and his disposition turned solemn. "Yes, Cinderella, I can tell you. I saw torrential rain over many days that flooded Atlantis and Lemuria." We all stood in disbelief, some of us exclaiming to one another, as we had not been expecting Maxim to present us with such an insight. "I am not sure how or why this torrential rain was created," said Maxim. "However, we need to set sail in that beautiful boat if we are to survive this catastrophe." Shamara came rushing towards us, her cheeks flushed red and a worried look on her face. "Well, it is one thing to save ourselves, but how do we save everyone else? What can we do for the civilizations who live here?" "Shamara," said Maxim, "we will let everyone know. And while we are on that subject, if anyone would like to return to the Pleiades, or even find refuge on Jupiter or somewhere else, please, you are free to leave." "We are staying," announced Shamara. "Door Crystal do not retreat from the mission that they agreed to embark upon." Maxim looked everyone in the eyes, one after the other, and when he had our unanimous approval, he nodded his head. "Good. Our presence here on Gaia is imperative. We are making a difference just by being here, with our consciousness, and when this disaster is over, we can be of much assistance. How is it possible that with only our consciousness we can make such a difference? Inquired Cinderella, her eyes inquisitive and searching. Ah, another good question, said Maxim. Allow me to explain. As you know, everything has a toroid, including every being. The third density Earth's toroid, for example, is the most basic set of frequencies that can be manifested in physicality. Oh, yes, exclaimed Shama-Ra. And in comparison, a fifth density toroid is not only different, it is bigger, or it has a more complex range of frequencies. Bravo, said Naishara. The higher the frequency, the more complex the toroid, because the energy becomes more and more complex as the densities go up. All densities are unaware of the densities above them, added Sarah, because they are not a frequency match. Oh, I love this, exclaimed Shama-Ra. So a third density being cannot read a fifth density being. Yes, said Maxim. However, it can recognize some aspects of the higher frequency. It can recognize the fifth density consciousness up to and including the third density. The fifth density being, interjected Altar, sends out a ripple effect that interacts with and changes everything around it. The third density consciousness, said Sarah, interprets the fifth density ripple effect as a disturbance. Oh, I remember how this works, began Shama-Ra. The third density consciousness feels this disturbance, but it cannot read the disturbance because it is too chaotic for its lower consciousness. It cannot, however, reject the fifth density consciousness either, because now it is inside its rippling effect. So the only option is to absorb the higher frequency. And as it tries to integrate the ripple of chaos, I said, it begins to change. The third density consciousness raises its frequency and can now change its timeline and manifest fifth density outcomes. This is the mechanics of manifestation, said Maxim. This is how the universe works, and just by being here, the starseeds are raising the frequency of humanity. As you raise your frequency, you pull everyone else up also. Yes, said Altar, and you do this by affecting the collective unconscious mind. Is this also called the hive mind that humanity all share together? Asked Cinderella. Yes, said Maxim. Most people do not even know that their thoughts are not their own. Often, beliefs and programming are placed into the hive mind consciousness of humanity by the Dark Ones. The uncomplicated human brain is unaware of the higher self, I said. The human brain merely translates the information that is in the human hive mind consciousness. And the ego, which is the personality of the biology, thinks that it is the hive mind, and so it is easy to mind control. A higher frequency being, however, said Altar, can insert their higher frequency knowledge into the hive mind consciousness and raise the frequency of humanity. All right, said Maxim, rubbing his hands together. We need to gather supplies and appropriate clothing and prepare to board Orca. We are setting sail in 7 days, and I do not know how long we will be abroad." We were busy for a week, gathering supplies and alerting others of the impending destruction, until finally we were ready to set sail. Many of the interstellar travelers chose to leave on their starships, and yet, as Maxim predicted, many inhabitants chose to stay. Some journeyed to Atlantis to warn the people who were receptive to the news, although many in that region were simply unable to escape the fate that awaited them. "This is one of the most beautiful dhow boats I have ever seen, Maxim," exclaimed Dulkara. "Thank you," said Maxim. "Although she is a typical trading vessel that is used to carry heavy items, she certainly is beautiful." "How long is she?" asked Dulkara. He peered at the boat and seemed to be calculating her length. "I would say 60 feet long?" "That is right," responded Maxim, "and her triangular lateen sail has the front corner cut off, and this gives Orca her quadrilateral shape." "And these carve our planks that overlap one another," said Dulkara, his hand running along the wood. "You have sealed them with bitumen." "I love the paintings along her hull," said Shamara, as she studied the orcas propelling themselves out of the waves. "They are stunning, and such a beautiful use of the eggshell blue and ochre natural pigmentation." "And this leeboard is obviously hand-picked," said Altar, admiring the leeboard that was stored along the side of the boat. "It is a pivoting leeboard and functions in a similar way to a centerboard," said Maxim. "It is constructed from solid hardwood and it is 3 meters long. It gives the boat stability and allows her to ply waters that a fixed keel boat would not be able to traverse. With a leeboard, we can work close inshore, and there is also more room to hold cargo. We are going to need all of the cargo room that we can get." "Oh, and I see that you have forged iron around its edges to protect it from scraping along the shoreline," said Altar. The deck of Orca was open, and it is where we slept on fine, humid evenings. However, we could also sleep below the deck. The quarterdecks were strewn with large killam cushions to sit, lay, or sleep upon, and Hessian hammocks were also available as a comfortable alternative. An old sail, made of canvas, was erected over the seating as a canopy to create shade. We all went below deck to store our supplies. The structure and engineering was visible from the inside, so we could see the ribbing that sprouted out from the keel and the bronze pegs that held the high-stress areas of the boat. "I remember how you connected with every tree," I said, looking into Maxim's eyes. "You asked their permission before you took the limbs." "That is right," said Maxim. "I selected the limbs that already had the curved shape that I wanted, and then I shaped the wood, only slightly, to get the right symmetry for the hull." We stored our food away in the clay-fired pots in the larder inside the boat. When we were sailing, the pots would be kept inside chests, adorned with leather and bronze, and lashed down with flat-woven Hessian straps. It felt glorious to be journeying with my light family once again as we chatted, ate, slept, laughed, and took turns at the helm. There was a part of me that loved to discard my gowns and wear suitable sailing attire. I often wore Maxim's clothes when we sailed, as this helped me to connect with him on a deeper level and sometimes to know what he was thinking and feeling. Oh, how glorious to be sailing on Orca once again! The winds were light and the temperatures were moderate, although Orca was constructed from wooden pegs, so there was always a lot of movement as she sailed in and around the networks of rivers. We were all so happy as we remembered other timelines together and reminisced about past and future events. Unbeknown to us, however, the Dark Ones who were not living on Tiamet had sent out signal repeaters to trick the M45 Pleiadian Council on Alcyone. The Pleiadian Council, being curious, when they detected the signal repeaters on Tiamet, went looking because they thought that the Dark Ones in Atlantis had found a way of inhabiting Tiamet. It was, however, the off-planet Dark Ones whom the Galactic Federation had been fighting for over 1 million years. The Dark Ones were getting more and more powerful because the fear of the Atlantean Lyrians on Gaia was feeding their consciousness. When the Pleiadians went to investigate, a battle ensued on and around Tiamet. We looked up into the heavens and could see battleships fighting one another, exploding in the sky, and hear the decimation as the destruction rung out through the ether. "Maxim!" I shouted. "What is happening?" "It looks as though the Pleiadian Council are fighting the off-planet Dark Ones," he said. We all clambered together, our hands shielding our eyes from the sun as we peered up at Tiamet. And then the unthinkable, the unimaginable occurred in the sky above us. The Dark Ones had the equivalent of dirty hydrogen bombs that were energized by zero-point generator reactors, and once deployed, they destabilized Tiamet, causing a pole reversal of the planet and a change of orbit. This set up a resonance throughout the solar system that shook Tiamet to pieces, and when destroyed, the planet actually imploded and exploded at the same time. We saw rocks, debris, water, and gases flying through the air and experienced an enormous boom that seemed to reverberate throughout our body, mind, and spirit. Holding each other tightly, we all sunk to the floor together and wept and cried in anguish. Several days later, as we watched the heavens falling apart, Tiamet was in the sky no longer, and we knew that this glorious planet had been destroyed. "The Orion Wars have now come to Gaia," said Maxim. "Oh!" I exclaimed. "What is that noise?" "Those are the shock waves from the destruction of Tiamet," yelled Maxim above the noise. We could also feel minor tectonic plate movements as Gaia groaned and rumbled. "Okay, everyone, the tectonic plate is starting to move," said Maxim. "I am going to lash you all onto the boat because this could mean a tsunami." Maxim secured the ropes around our waists and returned to the helm. "Is everyone comfortable for now?" "Yes," we all replied. In the distance, we could also see and hear volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. "There are many fissures that have opened on Gaia," shouted Maxim. "You can see the magma oozing out onto the surface of the earth." "Yes," shouted Altar, "and as the water reacts with the eruptions, the gases from the steam are deadly to biology." There was another catastrophic boom. It was a deafening sound as the tectonic plates on Gaia began to move more rapidly. We all watched as whole continents sank and new mountain ranges rose in only a few hours. Oceania sank into the waves, and Lemuria, and we suspect Atlantis, were no more. "Maxim!" I shouted. "Oh, Maxim!" Orca was tossed around and yet acquiesced to the rise and fall of the tsunamis that saturated the earth. "The storm water is flooding over the gun walls," shouted Maxim. "We need to bail the water out." We untied ourselves from the lashings and all worked hard to bail the water out of Orca. Our hair was drenched, our faces dripping with water, and everyone was focused on keeping Orca afloat. We knew that there would be a huge loss of life and civilizations would now be destroyed. It is these memories that are still in the lower hive mind consciousness that are creating the fear of annihilation in third density humanity. As we looked back into the heavens, we could see the masses of water that were once Tiamet's oceans suspended in space. Over time, the water was pulled into the force field of many planets and moons in our solar system. The water was also pulled into Gaia's centrifugal force, and soon we began to experience heavy rain. It did not take long for the rain to become torrential, sometimes described as 40 days of rain, as the water gathered and poured onto the planet. "Maxim," said dhow, "the networks of lakes and rivers have disappeared. We are sailing upon huge, deep oceans, and it is uncharted territory." "Yes, dhow," replied Maxim. "We do not know what is beneath us, and we do not know if there is any land ahead of us." In which direction do you think we should sail?" asked Altar. "We will head due east," said Maxim. "There is the strong possibility that some of the massive mountain ranges of Oceania are still above sea level." We sailed for many days and nights, taking turns at the helm and searching for land. We could not use the celestial night sky to navigate our course, as it was covered in dust and ash, so we had to rely on wind direction. The sun also could not penetrate the volcanic debris. However, the temperature was still warm. To avoid inhaling the dust and ash, we each wore a scarf around our nose and mouth. The days turned into weeks, and still we did not sight any land, until eventually we arrived at a small island in what is called, in Earth's future, Rapa Nui. "Oh!" I exclaimed. "I can now see our beautiful stone monuments scattered on the hills." My excitement, however, soon turned into melancholy. It is so strange to now see that Oceania has been reduced to a small island. Shama-Ra rushed to the side of the boat and, clutching the gunwales, she peered at the monuments. "They are magnificent!" "Do you think there are any survivors there?" I asked Maxim. "I do not see anyone," Maxim replied. "I am not sure that it is a good place to seek refuge just at the moment. There doesn't seem to be any food or fresh water." We sailed around what was now the island and saw that it only looked to be a few square miles. We did not see any signs of life. I have a strong feeling that if we sail from here for another, say 1,000 miles, said Maxim, we will arrive at the mountain range that would have been the eastern part of Oceania. The continent of Oceania has gone. However, her eastern mountain ranges may still be above sea level. "We can pick up the trade winds if we sail to the north," said Dhow. If the trade winds are still blowing," said Altar. "We will sail north for a few days," said Maxim, "and then due west to the other side of what was Oceania." Maxim adjusted the sails, and pointing Orca towards the north, we all enjoyed a wonderful journey. This is Orca's perfect direction of sail, a broad reach going downwind. We sailed for several more weeks, and seeing many albatross flying above us, we knew that there was no land for hundreds of miles. "In my experience," said Dhow, "albatross are only occasionally seen as they migrate around the planet. However, we have seen so many, this indicates that there is not much landmass." "Well, all migrating animals follow ley lines," said Altar, "and now the ley lines have changed with the tectonic plate movements." The volcanic ash had started to dissipate, and to gather fresh water, we strung up a canvas which was an old sail and funneled water into containers. Over time, several birds landed on Orca and stayed with us for several days. Even although our food and water was precious, we fed the birds who were hungry. On some mornings, we woke up to find that the birds who had been travelling with us for several days, or even weeks, had suddenly gone. They had picked up the strength that they needed and continued their journey also. By now, we were all feeling stressed and unsure about our predicament. In addition, there were the occasional large waves and the rumbling sounds of tectonic plate movements that were unnerving to say the least. However, Maxim's incredible strength and self-assured disposition put us all at rest. Eventually, we settled into a rhythm of quietude that brought a strange level of normality, and, of course, we were sailing into the unknown. It was a whole new experience. "Out of this chaos," said Maxim, "there will be a positive outcome. We will survive, and everything is going to be all right. We simply have to trust." "All thoughts create," said Naishara. "That is right," said Maxim. "When we experience chaos, clarity is important." "Otherwise," said Sarah, "with our fear, we will create even more chaos. Whatever your thoughts are, it is a frequency that you automatically adjust to." "And the way the universe works," said Maxim, "you will attract that frequency to you. So, I encourage you all to be clear on your thoughts, particularly now as we venture into the unknown." "Absolutely," said Shama Ra. "That must be the focus of our attention. Everything will work out perfectly." We continued to take turns at the helm, night after night, searching the horizon for land. We had been making sure that we were always pointing into the setting sun, which was due west. And then, one evening, right at dusk, Orca became excited. "Oh, can anyone smell that?" said Orca. "The wind has shifted, and I can smell land, a big body of land." "Land ahoy!" shouted Shama Ra, who was standing on the deck, her hands shielding her eyes from the setting sun. We all raced to where Shama Ra was standing. "Are those mountains?" exclaimed Naishara. "Or are they clouds?" "I can definitely smell land," I said. "It smells like pollen and grasses. It is pungent. Oh, and I can smell sulfur as well." "It certainly is a different smell to the salty air we have become accustomed to," said Cinderella. Early the next morning, there was the familiar sound of seagulls, and some of them landed on the boat. We could see the mountain peaks more clearly now, and standing on the deck with the sun rising behind us, we all let out exclamations of excitement. This was the only part of Oceania that was remaining, and it was on the western side of what is known in 21st century Earth as the top of the North Island of New Zealand. The seagulls were squawking and fighting above us as we headed Orca into an enormous unknown bay littered with small islands. In Earth's future, this bay was aptly named the Bay of Islands. "There may be food here," said Sarah, "and perhaps a more abundant supply of fresh water." We carefully negotiated our way into the bay and anchored close to the shore of a small island. Maxim felt that the island would protect us from the ocean in case there were more tsunamis. Jumping overboard, we waded through the calm water and scrunched our toes into the muddy sand. "Oh, how wonderful!" exclaimed Shamara. I am loving the feel of the sand as it scrunches beneath my feet. Portions of the forests were scorched with lava. However, the area where we had anchored was still pristine. There were massive Cody trees, 60 meters tall, with trunk girths up to 16 meters in diameter. The sound of birds calling in the trees was a wonderful experience to encounter, and we could hear a waterfall that was pounding in the distance. We had been at sea for many months, and now, standing on solid ground, we all felt relieved and comforted. This looks promising, said Dulkara. Perhaps we could build shelters here and grow food as well. Well, I don't know about you, said Shamara, but I need a shower. I am covered in salt and my hair feels sticky. We all laughed. We all walked up to the waterfall to shower in the fresh water. As we closed our eyes, standing under the waterfall, we all felt the swell of the ocean once again and had to open our eyes to stabilize ourselves. Whoa! Oh, sorry, Shamara, I said as I grabbed her arm to keep myself standing up straight. After our experience, I felt so alive. To have spent so many months upon the ocean, our future unknown, and only trust to hold on to, a new level of assuredness had begun to engulf my awareness. It was the feeling of my own strength that comes from overcoming such a catastrophic experience. I looked at Shamara. She could feel it too. And holding on to each other, under the waterfall, we both burst into tears. And then, one by one, we all broke into tears. We all cried and sobbed, letting go of the months of trepidation and fear that had built up in our bodies, and it felt so good to release it. There was a twinkle in Maxim's eyes that I had not seen since we had left our temple home in Lemuria. My eyes caught his, and both crying, tears and water cascading down our faces, he embraced me in his arms. We stood there, under the waterfall, holding each other, feeling our love for one another, and knowing that our journey was only just beginning. And so, my journey continues.